Tonight you are exactly where you need to be. You've found your way to a quiet little corner of the night, where the world slows down, the stars begin to whisper, and soft stories drift like moonlight through the dark. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's story, I just want to gently ask, if you find comfort in these bedtime moments, it would mean the world if you'd take a second to like this video, subscribe, or even share it with someone else who could use a little peace. Your support helps keep this cozy space glowing night after night. Now settle in, let the day melt away, and let's begin. Once there lived a peasant whose only daughter, Martha, had eyes as blue as cornflowers and long hair like the silk around an ear of corn. All the lads of the village were after her, but she cared only for John, a young huntsman, who was called by her father an idle vagabond and sent away from his cottage in disdain. Now, the village where they lived was at the foot of a high mountain covered with a dense forest, into certain portions of which few were found to venture, so wild and lonely they were. One day Martha went, unknown to her father and mother, to ramble in the forest. She said to some of her friends that she meant to gather flowers and pick berries, to sell to a rich lady who lived near them. But the truth was that a week had passed without John having set foot in the village, and she was anxious and uneasy, and wished to visit some of her lover's favorite haunts, to see if he might be there. It was no uncommon thing for John to be absent for several days while trapping and hunting. He could sleep as well on a bank of moss as on his pallet at home, and he loved to go to rest under the broad canopy of the sky, studded with bright stars, and to be lulled by the music of falling waters. Martha, dressed in her brown cotton frock with the scarlet handkerchief knotted over her fair hair, was seen to go up a rocky pathway on the mountainside, where the firs and larches made a bower overhead. But that night she did not come home. And next day, when John came into the village with a splendid string of birds he had shot miles away from there, in an opposite direction to the one Martha had taken, it was to hear the sad news of the poor girl's disappearance. John's face grew pale and his stout heart grew faint. He thought of what all the others were thinking of, the wild woodsman, against whose magic his gun and staff might avail nothing. The mountain above was believed to be the haunt of a mysterious being, half man, half brute, fierce and cruel, from whose den no living creature might ever be rescued. The wild woodsman, for so the natives called him, took many a shape to trap unwary travelers, and a fair young girl like Martha would be a rich prize for him. John had long vowed to capture the wild woodsman, and now he was filled with a mad thirst to seek him at once. Without stopping to hear more, the young man rushed off up the steep mountain path, bounding like a chamois from rock to rock. As the villagers, awestruck and tearful, gazed after him and crossed themselves in superstitious fear. Through brake and briar John darted on. He was soon in the dark recesses of the forest, where the undergrowth was like a jungle. His fleet foot never tired in the chase, and, ere long, he spied a little red handkerchief upon the ground. Recognizing this to be Martha's, he gazed about him and saw, by the token of broken bushes, that the girl had been dragged away from that spot up a rocky wall, which it seemed to him no foot could scale. Struggling to keep down his sickening dread, John determined to follow. He began to climb the steep rock. His faithful dog, who had kept close beside him, suddenly gave a low, fierce growl, and the hair on its back bristled up in fury. John was already halfway up the cliff, when, on looking down, there, just where he had picked up the handkerchief, he saw a queer little old fellow, making shoes as quietly as if nothing at all had happened. "Hello there!" roared John, for he suspected mischief. The old man looked up, and John saw that he had a young and rosy face with hair as gray as a badger's. The odd creature made signs that he was stone deaf, and beckoned John to come down. All this time the dog was growling fearfully, and John took warning from the sign. He leveled his gun without more ado, and said, "Answer, you fellow. Who are you that have cheeks so fair, and an old man's locks?" "I," said the old man, hopping up with a dreadful grin. "You will know me soon enough, sirrah, for I am the devil's grandfather." He stretched out an arm that grew longer every minute, and his hands changed to the claws of a beast. John lost no time, but taking aim fired at the wild woodsman, for he it was, and none other. Bang! The friendly bullet made straight for the creature's heart, and though it did not kill him outright, the wild woodsman was sorely wounded. He fell over a log, groaning pitifully, and prayed John to come to the aid of a poor old man. John said, "That I will with another bullet," when the wild woodsman darted from the spot, and was lost in the thicket. After him went the dog, after the dog went John. Such a hunt there never was. Through spots in the woods where man's foot had never penetrated, into bogs and into serpents' lairs, past the caves where bears were lurking. But no animal would touch John, for the wild woodsman was their deadly enemy. At last they came to a cleft in a little green hillock. Here was a hut covered with moss, and the wild woodsman, uttering a frantic yell, fell dead upon the threshold. John heard a shriek within the hut, and dashing down the door saw Martha lying bound with ropes made of plaited willow in a corner. He flew to set her free, but, to his surprise, Martha did not appear to know him. She let him take her by the hand and lead her from the fearful spot where the inner walls were built of the bones of the wild woodsman's victims. She looked up into his face and smiled, and John saw she had lost her reason. He did not stop to pick up the jewels and gold stolen from murdered travelers, with which the hut was strewn. but made all speed to leave behind the horrid place. He lifted Martha in his strong arms and carried her down a path along the far side of the mountain. A great storm arose, and the earth trembled under his feet. But he kept bravely on his way, and looking back saw the cleft in the hills widen. Then a great gulf opened, fire and smoke burst forth, and the hut of the wild woodsman was swallowed forever from sight. John gave a shout of joy, and began singing a hymn in his clear young voice. The storm ceased, the clouds parted. Down in the valley below was their own peaceful village, and the sound of the evening bells came floating up to him. Martha, who had lain in his arms as if asleep, stirred and recognized him. Her strength returned, and she asked to walk beside him. Strangely enough, she said nothing of her late adventure, then or ever afterward. Not a trace of it remained in her memory. When they reached the village, all the people came out to meet them, rejoicing. John told them he had rescued the lost girl, but the true history of his chase of the wild woodsman he kept to himself. Martha's father and mother greeted her with tears of thankfulness, and before another year had gone by, John and Martha were married in the village church. From that day forth, peace reigned upon the mountainside. But when stories of the wild woodsman were told to Martha's grandchildren, they little knew the share their hale old grandsire had in ridding the countryside of such a scourge. Once upon a time there were a poor couple who lived in a little cottage overgrown with vines. From roof tree to cellar, their home was as clean as hands could make it, and the table and chairs were scoured every day till they were as white as snow. The man went out into the woods to tie up faggots, and the woman kept a few bees and sold the honey. In this way they managed to live, and were happy, till a great storm came and swept off the roof of their house. Then the lightning set it on fire, and it was soon burned to the ground. The man came running from the forest and found his wife crying as if her heart would break, beside her beehives, which the wind had upset, scattering all their busy inmates and destroying the honey. "Where shall we sleep tonight?" said the wife. "Let us search till we find," answered the husband. So they set off and wandered into the woods while the storm raged over them. Long did they stray until night came. At last they saw a ruined hut left by some charcoal burners, and thankfully entered it. There was dry straw in one corner, and here the poor woman laid down, half dead with fright and fatigue. Both of them were hungry, and the man, putting his hand in his pouch, was glad to find there a bit of bread, which he was about to give to his wife, when a queer little black object sprang down the wall and seized the crust, running nimbly off with it. "Who are you?" cried the poor man. "I'm a lost hearth fairy," said the little creature in a piping voice. "If you had made me a fire to warm my poor bones, I should not have taken your food." The hearth fairy's teeth were chattering, and the man pulled together some sticks and straw, and lighted them with his flint and steel. The smoke curled up, the flames sparkled merrily. The hearth fairy slid down and warmed himself. "Hello there, give me back my crust," said the poor man, whose wife kept pulling him by the sleeve to remind him of her hunger. "Now that I think of it, I want this crust myself," said the hearth fairy. "I am off on a journey to seek a warm fireside, and I need something to strengthen me. But here is a duck instead, only you had better not kill her." A fine, fat duck tumbled at the poor man's feet. The hearth fairy vanished in the smoke. Oh, how the poor couple longed to kill and eat that duck! Their mouths watered as they thought of onion sauce and of breadcrumbs and of sage. Faint and starving, they fell asleep in a corner of the hut. When day broke, the poor man rose up and went to the door. The storm had ceased, and the duck was quacking on the door-sill. She waddled away, and left behind her a large egg of purest gold. Just then the lord of the forest rode by with his huntsmen. They saw the shining prize in the poor man's hand, and offered to buy it of him. "I will give it for a loaf of brown bread and a sausage," he said, "for my wife lies starving within." The huntsman gave him food and drink, and the lord of the forest, after hearing his story, had the poor couple taken to a nice empty cottage nearby, and told them they should have it for their own. The golden egg was sold, and the man and his wife lived in comfort all their days from the money it fetched. They never saw either the hearth fairy or the magic duck again, but the good wife soon went to beekeeping, which made her very happy. Oh dear," sighed Rosie. "I'm the most unhappy little girl in all the world." She was kneeling in a chair, gazing through the drawing-room window. In the street outside was drawn up a carriage, into which Nurse was packing all of Rosie's brothers and sisters. Clover was there, a boy of 12, looking rather disgusted with his surroundings, and having his head nearly cut off by his first upright collar. Violet, Rosie's twin sister, was there, dressed in the sweetest new pale blue camel's hair, and taking great care to turn the skirt of it up over her shoulders as she nestled into her corner of the landau. Rosie thought with a pang of her own new dress, the double of Violet's, hanging upstairs in the wardrobe in a melancholy way. Jonquil was there, the chubby, golden-haired, big-eyed brother, aged 3. And last of all was dear wee Honeysuckle, like a bundle of lace and flannel in Marie's arms, while old Nurse's spectacles could hardly be seen through the mass of sash ends and fluted petticoats, and scarlet stockings, and velvet breeches, and flying locks of hair completely filling the roomy carriage. No one could doubt that the children were going to a party, even if they had not announced that fact to everybody within earshot by the chatter of their busy little tongues. At last all were settled, and the carriage rolled away. "Goodbye, Rosie! Goodbye, Rosie!" came up in a shrill chorus, and the last Rosie's tear-dimmed eyes could see of them, hands and handkerchiefs were waving a farewell to the sister left behind. Then it was that Rosie's fortitude completely forsook her, and she dropped sobbing into the chair. It was a bitter disappointment, for the party was to be given by their aunt in honor of these children, and, in addition to Punch and Judy, magic, and a candy bag, they were promised a huge bran pie, full of delightful hidden presents. Rosie had suffered from a pretty bad sore throat the night before, and the doctor had forbidden her going out. It is no use for grown people to say, dear children, these disappointments of yours don't matter much, for they do. They seem as high as mountains in your path, and I fully sympathize with you all, and especially with little weeping Rosie. So thought her mamma, evidently, for she came into the room just then and picked the little bunch of blue serge and cardinal ribbons up in her arms and sat down with it in a low chair by the fire. "Boo-hoo," said Rosie, breaking out afresh when she felt Mamma's kisses on her hair and wet cheeks. Mamma said very little, but by and by the little girl began to feel comforted in spite of herself. "You know how it is, dears. First you stop roaring and moan, then your eyes are kissed dry, then you burrow your heads down and sigh, then you lie quite still for a little while, and at last, after blowing your noses in an heroic way, you are ready to laugh again." All this happened in Rosie's case, and for a while she sat talking, until her mamma was called away to attend to some household matter. By that time Rosie was quite content to be tucked into a corner of the comfortable sofa, covered with a down quilt, and left to gaze into the depths of a wood fire, burning gently, for it had passed the spitting, spluttering stage, upon two great old-fashioned brass andirons with claw feet and queer round bald heads. Around Rosie's couch was drawn a gay Japanese screen. Before the fire was spread a great black bearskin rug, and on either side of it stood a tall green porcelain jar. Clover always said these vases were like the ones in which Morgiana hid the 40 thieves, and the children had more than once stuffed baby Honeysuckle into one of them to keep her out of mischief during what nurse called their rampageons to split one's head. Over her mamma's writing table, low enough for Rosie to look into the very heart of it, hung a picture in a broad gold frame. The picture was of a chestnut wood in Brittany, and standing in the shadow of a drooping bough was a little girl of about 10, her own age. One of the little peasant maiden's arms was clasped around the neck of a big dog, harnessed to a cart of vegetables. Under the other arm she held a fat goose with a dangling neck. Overhead the sky was blue and the leaves seemed to be rustling in a summer wind. Around the feet of the tiny nut-brown maiden with her odd high cap grew tall heather and feathery ferns, with here and there a clump of flame-shaped lilies. When snow was on the ground outside, Rosie always loved to gaze at this pretty scene, and to fancy herself stepping over the frame to have a chat about vegetables and a ramble in the forest with Annette. Rosie's eyes wandered from one object to another in this pleasant room. Fluff, her mother's Skye terrier, curled up on her feet and fell asleep. The clock upon the mantel ticked softly. Fluff snored contentedly. Little particles of burning wood pattered into the bed of glowing embers below. Even the familiar rumble of the street cars along the thoroughfare at the end of their block seemed more subdued than usual, and Rosie lay, never stirring, until she found herself, without the least warning, slipping down through one of her mother's great porcelain jars into Japan. Fluff woke up, and dashed to the rescue with his fierce little raw of a bark. But there was nothing to be seen of Miss Rosie except the tip of a scarlet bow, with which nurse was wont to adorn the summit of her young lady's head. She felt the rustle of the dried rose leaves at the bottom of the jar falling over her in a fragrant shower, as she fell through space, pulling up, decidedly out of breath, in a very queer locality. It was a town where the houses looked as if they had been built for big dolls to live in. Houses with sliding walls, doors, and galleries made all of paper, that in 2 minutes you could take apart and pack up as you do a box of Crandall's blocks. The streets were honeycombed with quaint booths, and crowded with human beings going in and out of them like bees. The carriages were babies' perambulators, drawn by a tandem team of brown-skinned men, wearing a single garment each, and umbrella hats. There were no horses to be seen, but the cows wore blue cotton wrappers and shoes made of straw. Men, women, and children, at first sight, seemed to be dressed alike, all clattering around on high clogs, stooping painfully. And the funny little bald-headed babies were either carried pick-a-back by their mammas, or else were tucked in the breast of their fathers' loose wrappers, together with pipes, tobacco pouches, books, and a variety of other useful articles. Rosie looked about her in astonishment, till a girl came up and saluted her with solemn politeness, inviting her to a party which was just about to begin. "You had better have your hair dressed first," the girl said, "and I will lend you a decent frock." "Very well," said Rosie, thinking fondly of the blue camel's hair in the wardrobe at home. "Of course, this old everyday serge won't do for a party." The girl took her to the shop of a female barber, who made Rosie kneel down before a mirror of polished steel, and parted her hair in 2 or 3 long manes, which were stiffened with bandoline, and tied with paper twine in a wonderful bow knot on top. A fine tortoise-shell skewer was added, and the barberess, stepping back to survey her work, caught sight of Rosie's eyebrows. "Tut, tut," she said angrily. What were her parents thinking of to let them grow like this? And without more ado, Rosie's eyebrows were shaved off, and her face and neck were daubed with a thick white paste. Her under lip had a patch of red paint, and her teeth were stained with some horrid black mixture. Then she went with the Japanese girl into a paper house, where the party was to be held, and the girl lent her a loose silk gown, tied round the waist by a wide sash of pink crepe. On her feet were put foot mittens of white cloth, with a separate place for the big toe, and high lacquered clogs. "How can I walk?" said Rosie, tottering around when she was finally equipped in her narrow, uncomfortable garments. "Shh, shh, the company is arriving," said her hostess. And as there was no furniture, not even a chair, Rosie wondered where the company would sit. The company solved this difficulty by sitting on the floor, and then trays were handed around, containing all sorts of wonderful sweetmeats, flowers, and fruits in lovely colors, with conserved fruits, sugared beans, and candy fish, animals and birds. Each dainty was more tempting than the one before, and Rosie found the loose front of her Japanese gown the very thing for a party pocket, if any of you know what that means. Next came games. Lady go to sea, sick man and doctor, alphabet cards, and proverbs, and then more sweetmeats. Pleasant as it was, a sudden stop was put to the entertainment by a commotion, everybody seizing hold of another, all with frightened faces. Without warning, an earthquake came and turned the house upside down. Everybody fell out on the ground but Rosie, who flew up in the air, becoming entangled in the tail of a huge man-kite, carried along by the wind at a fearful rate of speed. Rosie thought this much more exciting than any coasting downhill she had ever tried, and she flew up, until the tail of the kite gave a flop, tossing her through a rift in the clouds. There she was, passing again through the bottom of the porcelain jar, and in another moment she had landed in the very center of the bearskin hearthrug. Rosie was just getting her breath, and wondering how she came to have her hair hanging in the usual tawny stream, when, to her great surprise, the bearskin began to move. "Hold on tight there. We are off," it said, in a low growling tone, though not unkindly. "Want to go to a party, hey? Well, I'll see what we can do for you in my part of the world." "Really, you take one so unpleasantly by surprise," exclaimed poor Rosie, as she felt herself again setting forth on an airy journey. "It is so cold here. I wish you would let me stop for my seal skin jacket." "Don't talk about sealskins, child. We are going where you will see enough of them. Oh, but it's grand there, up among the icebergs and the everlasting snowdrifts, where the frozen lakes gleam like red jewels in the light of the sun that never sets. Merry sports you'll see between my brothers and sisters. But I should be dreadfully afraid of them," began Rosie, trembling. "I have never met any bears outside of cages." But the words were frozen on her tongue, and some tears coming into her eyes rolled in little round icicles into her lap. Now they came to a world of ice and snow. Even the fir trees were no longer seen. Clinging to the rocks was a little rough moss, which served for reindeer's food. All else was chill and glittering. The sky arched with radiant pink that seemed to palpitate. Far below them was a polar sea, locking in chill embrace a lonely ship, her shrouds sheathed in ice, her ribs cracked against the huge silvery bulk of an iceberg, on whose jagged side she leaned despairingly, no sign of life on board. Rosie shuddered and shut her eyes, only opening them again when the bearskin set her down at the side of an odd little hut, built on a barren point of land above the ice-bound water dot. This hut was made of blocks of ice, the chinks filled in with moss and snow-caked over all. On top was a hole whence issued a faint curl of smoke, and out of an opening somewhere crawled a funny Eskimo lady, apparently as broad as she was long. She welcomed Rosie politely and took her in to the fire, a civility Rosie thought she could have done without. The whole family was collected there, with some guests invited in Rosie's honor, who had come in sledges drawn by dogs over the snow. The dogs also were within, and half a dozen children. It made Rosie think of the worms in Clover's can the days when her brother went a-fishing. So closely packed and squirming were her newfound friends. The place was full of smoke and smelled of fish oil. The feast consisted of frozen whale's blubber, handed around to be gnawed by the company, and of salt fish dried without cooking, with strips of reindeer meat. Rosie tried to be very agreeable to everybody present, but when they brought her the baby to kiss, she almost fainted. It was the greasiest little thing without a stitch of clothes on. By and by sleep overpowered the traveler, and Mrs. Eskimo laid a skin before the fire, offering her, for a pillow, what do you think? That self-same greasy baby. As this ceremony is an especial compliment to a stranger among the Eskimo, no one can refuse it, and Rosie, with much compunction, laid her head down on the poor little thing, who took it all as cheerfully as possible. Scarcely had the weary traveler closed her eyes when she opened them again on the lounge in the drawing-room at home. There, looking down on her with a friendly smile, was the little Breton maiden in the chestnut wood. "Come to my party," Rosie heard her whisper, and charmed with such a pretty new playmate, she stretched out her hands. The little French girl dropped the goose from under her arm and leaned out of her gold frame to help Rosie, who in 2 or 3 steps was safely beside her, treading down the tall heather and stirring the butterflies from their haunts among the flowers. How green and cool and sweet it was under the arching boughs. Far as the eye could reach, on every side were leaves rustling in the fragrant air, and the trunks of the ancient trees were gray and hoar as the beards of the old druids who once haunted them. Annette, for so the peasant maid was called, told Rosie many strange and interesting tales about this forest as they walked on, followed by the faithful dog dragging his cart of vegetables so carefully that he did not need a word or look to guide him. "Ours is one of the oldest inhabited parts of France," said the girl proudly. "I can tell you stories about every tree and rock and hill in the countryside, and I will if you like to hear them. But we must make haste to reach the market now, before the sun rises high enough to drink the dew from my vegetables. I was up before day to pick them, and my father has promised me that if I sell all, I shall have a party in the glen. Only think, not to work in the field all the afternoon, and to have as many chestnuts as we choose, a whole loaf of brown bread, and perhaps, if the stepmother is good-humored, a slice of seed cake." Rosie thought this a very poor sort of a party, but she found Annette such good company that it seemed no hardship to trudge along the hot and dusty road beside her when they emerged from the shelter of the wood. The 2 girls laughed and made merry until they reached the market town, and there the good dog came to a halt, while Annette arranged her cress and lettuces and beans and potatoes in tempting rows upon the stall, standing beside them with such a patient, smiling face that many passers-by were induced to buy of her. The fat goose went home in the basket of a fat housekeeper, and left in his place a pile of silver pieces. So Annette and Rosie soon turned back to trudge again the dusty high road, talking of the party they were to have in the glen that afternoon. Annette's home, which the two tired little travelers reached at last, was a quaint cottage, the steep moss-grown roof looking twice the height of its walls. Over the door grew a twisted pear tree, and all the ground around it, excepting the garden patch in a sheltered spot behind, was one waving mass of heather, strewn with gray boulders of mossy rock. Rosie gave a little cry of delight. "Why, it is the sweetest place," she cried. "It is like a bird's nest, Annette. How happy you must be here." Annette was about to answer when out of the door came a cross stepmother, who began scolding as soon as she saw the girls, snatched the pouch of silver money from Annette's side, ordered her to the right and left, and then, tired as the poor child was, harnessed her to the cart beside the dog, and made her draw a heavy pile of linen to the brook, where she was at once set to work to help her stepmother in the family washing. Rosie, half-starved by her long fast, was glad to share Annette's meager dinner of brown bread and a handful of boiled chestnuts, eaten under a tree by the brookside. Annette ventured to remind her stepmother of the promised party, and, for answer, received a smart box on the ear. "Is it a princess I have got to do my work, perchance?" said the cross old thing. "Thy father is far enough off in the field, not here to spoil thee by luck. So do thou and that idle girl yonder set to work and finish washing the linen. That's party enough for traipsing girls, in my mind." So Rosie, too, was forced into service, and all through the long afternoon she toiled with aching limbs. When night came, she and Annette were glad to seek a straw bed in a tiny roof chamber and cry themselves to sleep. "Never mind," said Annette patiently. "Tomorrow, perhaps, she may be kinder, and after we have worked all the forenoon in the field, who knows but we may have our party yet." Rosie remembered nothing more, except opening her eyes full upon the hearth in her mother's drawing-room, where she was immediately addressed by one of the old-fashioned brass andirons. "I should just like to show you what a party was in my time," it said in a cracked, high-pitched voice. "We, Sister Peggy and I, belonged, as you know, to your mother's grandmother, a good old revolutionary stock, and we lived in the old house up yonder in Salem, Massachusetts, until your mother took it into her fanciful head to fetch us here. I should like to know what we have in common with that little fiddle-faddle Dresden china clock and shepherdesses upon the mantelpiece. However, I won't talk about my grievances, for Sister Peggy always says that it is in very bad taste, and Sister Peggy knows. We lived in the room where your grandmother was born, my dear, and her first cap was fitted upon Sister Peggy's knob." "Will she never stop to take breath?" Rosie wondered. "I am dying to ask her a question. What's your name?" she suddenly called out, so abruptly as to make the old andiron jump, and let fall a broken brand upon the hearth. "Dear me, child, how you fluttered me," it said reprovingly. "I am Sister Polly, of course, as you would have heard in due time. Sister Peggy always says that little girls should be seen and not heard, and Sister Peggy knows. Where was I? Oh, when your grandmother grew old enough to invite her little friends to share her hospitality, the boys and girls would arrive at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The girls wore plain print gowns and muslin aprons edged with tambour work. Instead of that insane mop of hair you sport, with a bow in the middle looking for the world and all like your terrier Fluff, they had decent mob caps. Their hands were covered with mittens, and each one earned a bag with a piece of white seam, or plain stitching, or else a sampler frame. How pretty it was to see them sitting down to their work for a while. Then the tea table was spread, with flowered china cups and plates, and shining silver muffins, crumpets, sliced ham, homemade preserves and cream, and waffles strewn with cinnamon and sugar. "You make my mouth water," said Rosie. "All this took place by 5 o'clock," said Sister Polly, "and afterward the children had a good game of blind man's buff, or hunt the slipper, and a handful of nuts with a big red apple to stuff in each of their pockets upon going home. I remember a very little party your mamma had once when she was a child." "Do you? Tell me about it, please," said Rosie eagerly, for nothing was ever so enchanting to those children as stories about their mamma in her youth. She was just getting over the measles, and had been very much petted during her convalescence. Your grandmother promised her, in reward for taking a rather nasty dose of medicine, that she should have her little cousins from next door to drink tea on a trunk. This was an especial treat to your mamma. A large flat-topped trunk served as table for the little girls and their dollies. On it were spread the china doll tea things, and when they did not suffice in size or numbers, leaves from the grapevine above the dining-room porch were also heaped with goodies. Those children were satisfied with broken bits of peppermint stick, ginger nuts, wee biscuit, lemonade for tea, and in the center of the table a dish of horse cakes. "Oh, I know," said Rosie with much interest. "Mamma has often told us about horse cakes, and the funny little old shop where she used to buy them for a cent apiece. They had currants for eyes, and the children never knew whether to begin to eat at the head first or the tail." "Exactly," said Sister Polly. "Well, as I was saying, 4 little girls in clean white bird's-eye pinafores assembled around the trunk party, your mamma at the head, to pour out the lemonade tea. Each guest had a dolly in her lap, and your mamma had twins on hers. I think the difficulty began by her insisting that the twins should have a double share of all the good things, which the guests, with some warmth, disputed. At any rate, it is a sad tale to tell you, but a true one. A quarrel set in, and what should the hostess do but burst into tears, declare that her company were mean, horrid things, and then, dragging at the tablecloth, whisk the entire contents of the tea-table upon the floor. "Oh," said Rosie, "did my mamma do that? I don't believe a word of it. You are nothing but an old tattletale, Sister Polly, and I don't believe Sister Peggy is any better." Scarcely had Rosie uttered these disrespectful words when the enraged Sister Polly and Sister Peggy flew out upon her from the fireplace. Seizing her in their brassy claws, they shook the little girl fiercely, bumping her head first on one side, then on the other, between their knobs. Rosie screamed for help, and heard in return a merry peal of laughter. She felt a warm shower of kisses on her face, and opening her eyes saw Clover and Violet, Jonquil and the baby, Mamma and the nurses, standing in a laughing circle around her couch, while Fluff nearly barked his head off in the general excitement. "Rosie, you had the funniest nightmare," said Violet. "See here what a lovely bracelet was in the bran pie for you, and we've all saved you some of our bonbons." "It was rather a bully Punch and Judy," remarked Clover patronizingly. "That is, for the little ones, you know. I've seen such lots of 'em." Punch said, "Duty, duty, bing up de baby," squeaked happy little Jonquil, capering about. Baby Honeysuckle had gone to sleep after her first party. Rosie jumped up and kissed everybody around twice. "Dear knows I've had enough of parties," she declared joyfully, but nobody knew what she meant. A certain king had 2 daughters, one of them lovely and accomplished, and the other an ugly, cross-tempered personage, who early in life took to meddling with the black arts, and learned a great deal more of magic than she did of anything else. Blondina, on the contrary, for so the pretty princess was named, was the joy of all her nurses and governesses and tutors and music masters from earliest infancy. Her one fault was a tendency to laugh aloud on the slightest provocation. At 10 years old she could speak many languages, play on all known instruments, write essays and sermons, dance like a sylph, sing like a nightingale, and make chocolate caramel. Vixetta, the elder of the 2 sisters, before she had reached the same age, had made short work of her instructors, wearing out the health and spirits of a governess in a week, and driving 24 tutors into the lunatic asylum, while her head nurse was speedily reduced to skin and bone, and took a permanent situation as the living skeleton in a dime museum. The poor king remonstrated in vain with his headstrong elder daughter. Ordinary scolding had not the slightest effect upon her. Black marks and crosses against her name in the report. Book only made her laugh scornfully, and any attempt at bodily punishment ended in the Princess Vixetta throwing herself flat upon the ground, turning purple in the face and foaming at the mouth with rage in a way to daunt the stoutest spirit. So, for this reason, the unfortunate girl was allowed to follow her own fancies, stealing off at dusk nobody knew whither, although it was suspected that her favorite haunts were the black depths of a pine forest near the palace, where the country folk never cared to ramble even in broad daylight, or a certain ruined tower filled with bats and owls and serpents. One night a peasant, who approached this tower in search of a lost cow, saw green lights dancing madly around the broken walls, heard wild shrieks of laughter issue from within, and, on venturing to insert his inquisitive nose into a chink, had it tweaked by 2 red-hot fingers. Immediately afterward, he averred, he had seen the Princess Vixetta, in true witch dress, shoot by him on a broomstick, leaving a trail of brimstone in her wake. On reaching home, he found his sheep dead, his best cows gone dry, and his children ill of a fever. Such tales as these, of which there were many current in the countryside, came from time to the king's ears, and not being able to gainsay them, because of information he had got on his own private account, the unfortunate parent resigned himself to sink slowly to the tomb. In fact, he courted death rather than shunned it. Whenever he took cold, he would sit all night long in wet shoes in the draught of 2 open windows, and if that did not make him worse, would send away the doctors, refuse medicine, and try to beat his brains out on the marble floor of the palace bedroom. At last, one day, he choked on too large a mouthful of beefsteak, and when the physicians endeavored to relieve him, waved them away, and cheerfully expired. The Princess Blondina was immediately proclaimed queen in her father's stead. Nothing was heard but praises of the charming new sovereign, who, after the period of mourning had passed away, ascended the throne with much pomp and ceremony. All of this was gall and wormwood to the envious Vixetta, who, but for the kindness of her sister, would have been sent, by a vote of all the people, into exile in a distant land. Blondina announced that the Princess Vixetta should remain in her palace, and be offered an opportunity to reform her bad ways. Vixetta thereupon, pretending to weep, promised to do better, and to give up associating with her evil favorites, the witches, warlocks, and magicians. But in secret, her time was spent in conjuring a method to get rid of her beautiful sister, and to mount the throne in her stead. One warm summer day, Queen Blondina had just come in from rowing in her silver barge along the windings of the little river which watered the palace grounds. She rested for a while in the garden upon a bank of roses, myrtles, jasmine, and lilies of the valley, while allowing her maids of honor to fan her with huge fans of white ostrich plumes, and listening to the drip of fountains of orange flower water and eau de cologne. Suddenly she espied a poor old tattered crone, carrying a basket of luscious fruit, such as none of the queen's own gardens or greenhouses could produce. Pomegranates there were, dropping sweetest juices when cleft in twain, purple figs that melted upon the tongue, rosy nectarines, crimson plums frosted with silvery dew, and bunches of grapes glowing like jewels where the sunbeams touched their clusters. Queen Blondina sat up and exclaimed with delight, "Oh, goody, pray set your basket down. My servants will pay you handsomely for your lovely fruit." "Willingly, your Majesty," said the old woman. "You are welcome to the contents of my basket if you will but leave me the single hazelnut at the very bottom of it." The queen consented with a laugh at the absurdity of her wanting that one insignificant little hazelnut when such a delightful treat was at her service. Her servants unpacked the basket, and there, sure enough, at the bottom, was a tiny brown nut. Queer that she should desire to keep back that one little nut, thought the queen. I wonder why. Can it be so very delicious to the taste, or what? I wish I could see its inside. And so she went on, wondering and exciting her own imagination, till pretty soon Blondina would have given all the rest of the basketful for the possession of that single mysterious nut. She began by offering one gold piece, then another, till a glittering pile lay at the crone's feet. But still the old woman held out against parting with her treasure. At last Blondina burst into tears when the crone appeared to be melted by her sorrow, and advancing, whispered in her ear, "If I give you this nut," she said, "it shall be on one condition only, your majesty, and that is, that you crack it in the presence of your prime minister alone, in some remote corner of your palace." Blondina gladly consented, and sending away her attendants, took possession of the nut, and summoned her prime minister to her side. This functionary was a very stern and important officer of state, who had been foremost in the movement to banish the Princess Vixetta from the court. He arrived all breathless, at the Queen's behest, and in the meantime the old crone had disappeared as mysteriously as she came. Blondina ordered the Prime Minister to follow her to a secluded summer house, where, eagerly cracking the nut with her royal high-heeled shoe, she found inside only a few pinches of white powder, and a scroll containing some fine writing in an unknown tongue. "Thanks to my love of study, your majesty," modestly suggested the Prime Minister, "I have mastered the only language you have left unacquired, which happens to be Arabic. On this bit of paper I can decipher certain instructions to the finder." "Tell me them quickly, my dear lord," said the enchanted princess, "and I will apply myself to the study of Arabic tomorrow. So much for a neglected education," she added, with a sigh that she had left anything so important undone, for, as I have said before, this princess had a passion for acquiring languages. If the finder of this treasure desires to acquaint himself with the language of the animal world, and to take the form of any other living thing, he has only to snuff up a pinch of the enclosed powder, bow to the earth 3 times, and cry the name of the creature he desires to become, followed by these exact words: "Curry, curry, changed would I be." At once he will assume the likeness of the thing named, and will understand all he hears going on around him, remaining in that shape as long as he may choose. Whenever he wishes to resume his own natural form, he has only to bow himself again 3 times to the earth and repeat the formula already given. But let him, during the period of transformation, especially beware of laughing aloud, or he will inevitably forget the formula, and run the risk of remaining as he has chosen to be. "This is the most delightful thing I ever had happen to me," said the merry young queen, clapping her hands. "Come, my lord, I am dying to try the experiment. Suppose we become 2 turkeys and wander into the barnyard. Nothing could please me more than a little adventure of that kind. Besides, you forget I have never studied Turkish, and this will be an excellent opportunity." The Prime Minister, who was a man of sober years, beyond the taste for such madcap frolics, remonstrated in vain with his willful mistress. Blondina would have her way. And in a short time, behold both queen and minister indulging in a solemn pinch of white snuff and pronouncing distinctly the magic formula, while inclining themselves humbly to the earth. At once Blondina's gown of silken tissue was exchanged for a suit of neat brown mottled feathers, while the Prime Minister became just such a huge and unwieldy gobbler as would take first prize in a Christmas poultry show. "Oh, what splendid fun!" the Queen began, dying to laugh at her companion. But reflecting upon the possible consequences of this indiscretion, she became grave and silent, while the humiliated Prime Minister waddled after her into the barnyard, whither his perverse little sovereign now took her way, leaving the hazelnut securely hidden in a corner of the summer house. In the multitude of feathered folk assembled in the enclosure, our 2 turkeys passed almost unnoticed at first. They were surprised to find very much the same sort of talk going on among their new friends as among those they had left. The same struggle for prizes and for place, the same greedy rapacity, the same love of gossip and display. 2 new peacocks had that day been added to the collection, and were strutting up and down like fashionable loungers, discussing all the affairs of the nation and the conduct of the rulers. And, in listening to their discourse, the Queen found herself much enlightened about many of her subjects and their doings. "As to Her Majesty, Queen Blondina," said one of the peacocks, sending his tail up in a magnificent fan when he saw the admiring gaze of 2 young guinea hens bent upon him, "I have reason to believe that this unfortunate young woman is doomed soon to fall a victim to the wiles of that powerful enchantress, her sister, who, as is well known to all of us, has just become the sovereign of the underground fraternity of magicians, against whose spells all other witches and warlocks can do nothing." Blondina strained her ears to catch the answer, but the 2 talkers had passed on, and she heard a sharp voice say close beside her, "Come now, no struggling, if you please, Mr. Mole. I have not tasted so much as a mouse today, and you have crossed my path in the nick of time." "Dear Miss Tame Owl," pleaded the little velvet-coated victim, held tight in the claws of a spinster owl, domesticated in the barnyard by Blondina's special orders, "I must entreat you to let me off this time. I was hurrying to my daughter's wedding and mistook the way, straying into this dreadful place by the most unfortunate mischance. Consider the feelings of my family, who are all assembled and expecting me." "Come now, no nonsense," said the cross old thing. "My mouth is fairly watering for you." She was about to cut short the victim's observations in the most abrupt manner by taking him bodily into her crop, when Blondina interposed, and flying at the owl, boxed her ears soundly. At this, the venerable lady was so unpleasantly taken by surprise that she opened her mouth to gasp, and out fell the mole, who instantly scuttled away, but not without bestowing upon his turkey benefactress the most ardent thanks. After this little incident, Blondina's attention was distracted by a variety of curious studies in fowl life, and she forgot all about her companion, the Prime Minister, until, chancing to look around, she beheld him the center of an admiring throng of ducks, geese, and chickens, whose numbers were constantly increasing. "How grand he is! How big! How noble!" echoed on every side, and the Prime Minister, who was very vain, drooped his wings, set up his tail, and puffed himself into a magnificent fluffy ball. "Never have we beheld a turkey of so majestic a bearing," cried a gushing goose-widow, and a pair of young lady ducklings rolled up their eyes in rapture and nodded assent. The Prime Minister was in his glory. "Yes, I am indeed the champion," he said, swelling into a balloon of feathers. Just then, Queen Blondina's own pet kitten, Floss, wandered across the yard, and having no especial occupation in view, charged at full scamper upon the Prime Minister, who, alas for his boasted dignity, subsided ingloriously, and, shutting himself up tight, fairly turned tail and ran away, looking so excessively crestfallen and foolish that Blondina could not resist bursting into a long and merry peal of laughter. "What have you done, your Majesty?" cried the alarmed Prime Minister, now remembering himself, as together they took refuge in a neighboring field. "Is it possible you can have forgotten? And for my part, I saw nothing to laugh about. I never imagined a more dreadful beast than that unmannerly little pet of yours which attacked me." The Queen broke out afresh into laughter, and laughed until she cried. Then, seeing the discomfiture of the Prime Minister, she decided that she had for today had enough of the animal world, and would indulge no more in such amusements until tomorrow. "I beg 10,000 pardons, my dear lord," she said, shaking with suppressed laughter. "But if you could only have seen yourself! Ha, ha! However, we have nothing now to do but bow 3 times thus," suiting the action to the word, "and say, 'Kick, cuck, kick.' Dear me, what is it we must say? I can't for the life of me remember it." The Prime Minister was as much at a loss. "Perhaps your Majesty has forgotten the price you were to pay for a laugh," he observed bitterly. Blondina looked at him in blank horror. Too truly had she forgotten the formula, and turkeys they must remain. And now how sad their plight! In the midst of their other tribulations, hunger assailed them, and they could not eat the food provided for the rest. So they wandered into the fields and forest, picking at berries here and there. Though when evening came, footsore and weary, they determined to go back into the palace barnyard and see what was taking place there. They found all the animals and fowls excited over the events of the day, and soon heard the news that Queen Blondina had died suddenly that morning, leaving a will appointing her sister to reign in her stead. Next day a funeral took place, when the coffin was filled by a lovely waxen image of the late queen, and was placed in the vault beside her father. The false Vixetta, dressed in mourning, had followed weeping after it. Blondina and the Prime Minister now saw that they were indeed under the spell of a powerful enchantress, and resolved to travel to the dwelling of a certain wise woman in search of advice. After a long journey, the two turkeys reached the hut of the wise woman and told her their pitiful tale. "Unfortunately, I have no power against Queen Vixetta since she has become the sovereign of the underground band," said the wise woman. "But if you could gain an entrance to one of their Friday councils, you might pick up something to your advantage there." And then, as wise women speak but once in 24 hours, she shut the door in their faces and left them to their fate. Blondina and the Prime Minister repaired to the ruined tower whither Vixetta was wont to go on Fridays, and there, hiding behind a wall, they saw the wicked sorceress arrive and, lifting a trap-door in the cellar, disappear from sight. While they remained above, lamenting their hard fate, Blondina saw a tiny black object emerge from the ground at her feet, then another and another, till a troop of them were assembled. These were moles, and their leader, addressing the queen, informed her that he it was she had saved from the crop of the owl. "We have heard of your distressing predicament, your majesty," the mole added with deep respect, "and hasten to offer our services to conduct you to the council chamber of the underground band." Blondina thanked the mole fervently, and found upon following him that with his companions he had burrowed a long and beautifully smooth tunnel. Glowworms were ranged along the sides to light the way, and everything was arranged for her comfort. After a considerable time had elapsed, the travelers reached a gallery leading directly into a vaulted chamber where the witches and warlocks sat, each upon a cushion formed of a huge and swollen toad. In their midst, upon a throne made of serpents intertwined, sat the Queen Vixetta, around whose brow flickered a wreath of blue flames. Ah, she was a terrible witch to look upon. Blondina shuddered to remember the kisses she had often innocently pressed upon that skinny forehead and those lips of lurid red. Vixetta was in high spirits. She and her familiars hatched mischief together and gloated over their evil doings in fiendish glee. Then Vixetta listened to the reports of each of the wicked creatures in turn, and to Blondina's astonishment, in the narrators of these tales of witchcraft she recognized more than one of the most respected of her own subjects. Some of them were crones ancient and palsied, others were young and blooming girls Vixetta had led astray. Among the warlocks were the gray-haired miller, the good sexton, and a courtier in whom the queen had placed peculiar confidence. All were attended by black deformed creatures, half cat, half human being. In the center of the circle was a fire, and before it they set up the very waxen image of the queen which had been buried in her stead. Into this little imps were ordered to thrust sharp blades and needles in the region of the heart, while Vixetta pronounced a spell, at which all the others laughed rejoicing. "I'll warrant my Lady Blondina will be cured of her love of laughing after this, as well as of her curiosity. Long may she wander in her present shape," said the sorceress. "It was a merry trick I played her, and that audacious old Prime Minister who sought to do me harm." "And what, pray, was the rhyme your Majesty bid them recall?" asked the courtier warlock. grinning maliciously. "A simple one," replied the sorceress, "and you will remember it was once a password in our band. Curry, changed would I be." Blondina almost betrayed herself in her delight. She repeated the words again and again in mind, keeping profoundly silent until the witch revels were at an end. And at cock-crow the unholy gang broke up, vanishing like smoke through a trapdoor in the ceiling of the vault. "And now, dear little mole, take us back again," said the Turkey Queen, who longed to breathe the free air of heaven and to break her awful spell. "May it please your Majesty," said the mole, looking very unhappy, "there is a new difficulty. Yonder image of you which they consumed in the fire is a fresh enchantment that dooms you to remain perpetually in the place where you now are. And I find by consultation with a friend of mine, a bat who lives in this cave, and who is the most kind and obliging person, that on only one condition can you now leave this spot, and that I hardly dare name to you. Summon this bat to appear before me immediately," cried the wretched queen, who, finding that her feet were stuck fast to the earth, was truly overwhelmed, while the Prime Minister gave himself up to complete despair. The bat appeared, and a more repulsive huge creature it is impossible to picture. But his voice was gentle and his manner most humble and conciliatory. He began to apologize for presenting himself before the Queen, when she interrupted him impetuously. "Quick, quick! Tell me the condition on which I may leave this horrible place, where I shall die if I remain a moment longer. Who are you? Why are you here? And why should we trust in you when every living thing in this foul spot is devoted to the service of the evil one?" "I, like yourself, am a victim of, not a partner in crime, your Majesty," said the bat with dignity. "If you will permit—" "But I can't stop to listen to anything," sobbed the poor little Turkey Queen. "Get me into the daylight somehow or other, and then I will hear you gladly. Oh, kind Mr. Bat, forgive my unkind words. Only free me from this living tomb, if it be possible." "You have been told that it is possible, lady," said the bat pathetically. "But to be brief, since you insist upon it, only by promising your fair hand in marriage to—" "To whom?" cried Blondina in astonishment. "To me," said the bat, withdrawing more into the shadows of the vault. Blondina screamed with horror. "Oh, never, never!" she exclaimed, bursting again into tears of anguish. The mole, the bat, and the Turkey Prime Minister consulted together in low whispers, and the last-named gentleman, addressing the Queen, set before her the hopeless situation in which she now was, and urged her to accept the proposition of the bat. "Hear me too, fair Queen," said the voice of the bat. "I swear that if you consent, you shall never regret it. Only trust me, and all will go well. In consigning me to this spot, your wicked sister, who in my former estate desired to marry me herself, in spite of my aversion for her, swore that never should I be free from her enchantment, until a beautiful young bride should come to the rescue and promise to marry me as I am, without asking any questions. Then, and then only, I might escape, taking my bride and her attendants with me. "But your appearance, pardon me," said poor Blondina. "It is too dreadful for anything." "Trust me," repeated the bat, and in desperation Blondina murmured a promise to be his bride. Instantly the bat flew with alacrity into a corner of the vault, and bringing thence a bunch of mistletoe, angelica, and mountain ash, waved it thrice in a circle around Blondina, who up to that moment had remained as if rooted to the spot where she stood. The spell broke, and Blondina, starting joyfully forward, repeated, at his request, the same ceremony of disenchantment for the bat, as also for the Prime Minister, and all three of them, accompanied by the faithful mole, took their way to the upper regions without delay. Upon reaching the meadow where they had entered the underground passage, Blondina and the Prime Minister lost no time in running back to the summer house, where, regaining the hidden hazelnut, they safely and joyfully resumed their own true shapes. "And now, gentle lady," said the bat, who had flown after them, keeping his distance modestly, "I pray you to perform for me another kindly action. Close your eyes and sprinkle me with this powder, at the same time touching my head with the witch-defying plants. Then kindle a fire with these faggots of wood left here by your gardener, and cast me into the hottest portion of it." Blondina shrank from the task, but, finding the bat as determined as he was calm and dignified, obeyed him without another word of protest. Aided by the now alert and cheerful Prime Minister, she kindled a fire upon the hearth of the little summer house, and when it blazed high and hot coals fell into the center, she followed the bat's directions to the letter. Immediately there was a loud explosion. The hideous bat skin split asunder and shriveled up, revealing a beautiful young prince, who stepped unsigned from the ring of flame, and bent his knee before the Queen Blondina. She recognized in him a playmate of her childhood, Prince Florizel, son of a neighboring monarch, who years before had disappeared from his father's court, and had been mourned as dead by his sorrowing relatives. To enchant him in punishment for his scorn of her had been one of the first acts of Vixetta's acquired magic, and to accomplish it, the wretched girl had bargained away her entire life to the service of the evil one. Blondina greeted Florizel with the utmost pleasure and assured him of her willingness to fulfill the pledge she had made to the dreaded bat-lover. They returned to the palace, and on being observed by the attendants, who, believing them to be ghosts, ran terrified away, had some difficulty in persuading people that they were alive and in the flesh. Then, what joy reigned over the palace! Quickly the news spread through the city and kingdom. The indignant people flocked around the apartments of Vixetta, who was still asleep after her orgies of the previous night, and summoning her to come forth, declared that she should instantly be put to death in the presence of her victims. The miserable sorceress fell upon her knees and begged for her life. Again the generous Blondina entreated that her sister might be spared, but Prince Florizel interfered, and insisted that for the future safety of his queen, Vixetta should then and there be compelled to take a pinch of the magic powder and change herself into a bat. This was done, and the sorceress, flying from the window, was never heard of more. Blondina gave her hand and heart to Prince Florizel as soon as he returned from a visit to his parents, who were overjoyed to regain their long-lost son and heir. The marriage took place with great magnificence, and the royal couple lived in peace for the remainder of their long and useful lives. They would often walk in the direction of the poultry yard, and Blondina loved to tell her husband of all the things she had heard and seen there when in her turkey shape. But the Prime Minister, after he had weeded out of the kingdom certain obnoxious individuals strongly resembling the warlocks seen at the Underground Council, preferred to assume a dignified forgetfulness of all that had passed during his enforced experience as a feathered biped. To the latest day of his life he would always cross the road to avoid meeting a turkey gobbler, and for the race of pet kittens he continued to maintain the most unconquerable dislike. By the laws of the kingdom, to kill or injure a mole was made a capital offense, and once every year a little blind gentleman in a fine black velvet coat arrived at the palace to pay his respects to their majesties, who received him with every mark of favor and affection. And now, as we come to the end of this session, if you're still awake, I would like you to feel the calm you've created within yourself. You've given your mind and body such a beautiful gift, a moment to simply be. Let that sense of peace stay with you as you move through the rest of your night. If you'd like, you can stay here a little longer.